When I was 19, I was still living with my family, as well as working 2 jobs to save up money. One food service and one retail. I was also extremely depressed. I had been sexually assaulted the year prior and was still taking everything really hard. How I very poorly dealt with my depression was sleeping around, drinking, and a whole lot of weed. I stopped counting who I was sleeping with once my body count hit the 40s. One of the ways I got my hookups was through a very popular BDSM website. I was casually chatting with a guy called Charlie. We met in a public park, and even though he was a little strange, he didn't seem dangerous. I made it very clear from the get-go that I didn't want anything serious whatsoever, strictly friends with benefits. I also kept him around because he was 27 and bought me booze with my money. After a few weeks of this, he admitted to me he was autistic, which didn't bother me in the slightest, because I'd met many people on the spectrum who functioned like normal members of society. Everything was going relatively okay, until I found out that some of my co-workers knew him. The ones who knew him were all around the same age, so it of course didn't surprise me. But naturally I was curious and asked around what people knew of him. My boss, who knew him, simply said he was strange. A co-worker in a differing department said he gave her super creepy vibes all through high school. And one of my co-workers, who I saw almost every other shift, said that Charlie was almost always actively trying to break him up and his boyfriend. I thought it was super strange, didn't know he was bi, didn't really care. I confronted Charlie about it, and he told me some half-truths about how he had a crush on my co-worker. I told them to leave them alone because they were newly engaged. Over these 2 months, I met a guy through my food service job who I really liked. His name was Beck, and because I liked Beck a lot, I started distancing myself from Charlie. Well, of course, he doesn't like this and starts giving off some red flags. Charlie told me he was almost positive he was schizophrenic. I told him that even though I was a psych major, I was no way near being qualified enough to help him, nor did I really want to, but I encouraged him to find help, and even recommended my own therapist or her husband. He told me he already went to both of them for psychiatric care when he was 15, and they both diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, psychopathy, and dismissed him. I inquired to my therapist about the last time she or her husband diagnosed someone, specifically a minor with APD. She said that neither of them had ever, as it was pretty rare, and I confronted Charlie about his lying, and he denied ever doing so. He continued to try and talk to me about his mental health, which I didn't mind listening to, but I wasn't qualified or let alone licensed to give advice on other than seek help. Charlie then dropped the bomb that he wholeheartedly believed he was a 300-year-old Nazi vampire who killed Jewish infants during World War II in a past life. I tell him he needs to seek serious help if he's having these thoughts and false memories. Charlie also said he'd been having dreams about my parents' dogs tearing him apart, and that he had also had dreams about murdering me. My body kind of kicked into survival mode, so I faked getting a phone call from my parents to have an excuse to leave. I cut off all contacts with him shortly after, at the advice of my now boyfriend, Beck, as well as my parents. I am now also in the process of moving in with him, and I was going to have to break it off with Charlie anyhow. Charlie constantly sent text messages and leaves numerous voicemails, but I only ever had the idea to record one of them, in which he begs me to stay and to not leave him behind, like my retail co-worker did. Things go a little quiet for a few days, and I think he's finally given up, until one evening at my food service job he shows up. I immediately took off my gloves and ran into the back room. My boss follows me and basically asks me what the hell is going on, because I'm doing this in the middle of a rush. I tell him a very, very condensed story of what's happening and beg him to let me stay in the back and work instead. I can tell he's skeptical, but lets me stay in the back as long as I work. I tell Beck to let him know what's going on, and he hauls ass to my job. While talking to Beck, 2 of my co-workers were helping Charlie with his order, when he said, "I know Lily's in the back hiding from me." He paid for his food, leaves, and my co-workers tell me it's safe. Beck is outside waiting for him, and tells him very firmly without threatening that I didn't want to see him anymore for any reason. Charlie tries saying that he only came there for the food. Beck tells him there's another restaurant like this downtown. Beck made sure I'm okay and then left. When I return home, I tell my parents what's happening, and they tell me to get a restraining order. Beck and my retail co-workers came with me to the police station to file the report. My uncle, a retired lawyer, gets in contact with an old friend who will be my counsel. My uncle, my lawyer, and Charlie's lawyer all talk and come to an agreement that if Charlie never talks to me or comes to my place of work ever again, I will drop all charges. But if he doesn't abide by the restriction, he will be tried and likely lose, since I have numerous witnesses and video evidence to back me up. The ending is slightly anticlimactic, but he does as he's told. So yeah, that was my unfortunate stalking experience.